When people have conversations about footballers, topics about their skills, money, fame, and fortune are mostly discussed. Yes, these mini gods of football ride in the best sports cars, live in huge mansions, and some even have their own private jets. However, that still doesn't make them more invincible, as they are still humans just like the rest of us. Some footballers have encountered situations that almost took their lives, but were lucky enough to escape. How did these events happen, and how did the world react to the news? Join us as we examine the stories of footballers that almost died. Lionel Messi. In 2022, Lionel Messi finally achieved his lifelong ambition of winning the World Cup. But just 6 years earlier, the football legend was only 18 minutes away from perhaps losing his life. The date was November 11th, 2016, and Messi, with his Argentine teammates, was on a plane back to Buenos Aires. Despite a selfie that showed some of the Argentine players smiling, they were anything but happy. The team had just lost 3-0 to Brazil, and their World Cup qualification was in jeopardy. Messi and his Argentine teammates were desperate to get their campaign back on track, and luckily for them, the team was billed to play another game 5 days later. That game against Colombia was an opportunity for redemption, and it would be right in front of their home fans. It was one thing they all looked forward to. The team was traveling on British Aerospace 146 plane. The aircraft, with registration number CP2933, had a flight capacity of 4 hours and 22 minutes on a full fuel tank. Messi and his teammates, while plotting how to defeat Colombia and qualify for the World Cup in Russia, spent a total of 4 hours and 4 minutes aboard the aircraft. That's just 18 minutes before it runs out of fuel. Thankfully, the flight was successful and the match against Colombia ended in a goalless draw. But that's not the remarkable part of this story. 18 days later, the same British Aerospace 146 that once transported Messi and his teammates crashed. The plane was reported to have run out of fuel because a scheduled stop for refueling in Cohiba did not materialize, and this was because the airport did not operate at night. The plane was carrying 77 passengers when it rammed into a mountainside by Medellin, Colombia, and on board were players and staff of a Brazilian football team, the Chapecoense Real, and 71 passengers died while the remaining 6 survived the ordeal. These survivors included 3 players, 2 crew members, and 1 journalist. That crash was an unfortunate event that sent shockwaves around the footballing world, but it's scarier to think of what could have been if Messi and his Argentine teammates had been on that plane for another 18 minutes. Cristiano Ronaldo. Messi and Ronaldo are 2 names often placed side by side in the world of football. Both players are generally regarded as 2 of the best players of their generation, if not all time, or the GOAT, as some have put it. Team honors and individual honors, these 2 players have them in abundance. But just as Messi narrowly escaped death in a plane crash, Ronaldo too has had his near-death experience. See, Ronaldo is no different from other multi-millionaire sports stars. He loves cars, owns a fleet of them really, and his love for cars began very early in his career when he was one of the young stars lighting up the football world. So when he woke up late for training on the morning of June 8, 2009, his phone was blowing up with messages from his teammate and manager, and at that point, he had just one thing in mind. The Portuguese star dashed from his bedroom into the garage, carefully scanned his fleet of exotic cars, and picked one. It was the red Ferrari 599 GTB, which he had purchased for £200,000. Ronaldo turned his key in the ignition, and the sexy sports car roared to life at his command. He felt good when he glanced at his watch and saw that with this car, he would not be the last person to arrive at Carrington, Manchester United's training complex. And as the car glided through traffic just before the tunnel on Manchester Airport Road, Ronaldo saw his teammate, Edwin van der Sar. The Manchester United goalkeeper at the time was behind Bentley's wheels and also on his way to training. Ronaldo sped past him, grateful that someone else would be the last to arrive at training. With van der Sar trailing behind, Cristiano Ronaldo entered the tunnel, oblivious of a looming danger lurking some seconds away. In a split second, Ronaldo's Ferrari collided with a barrier on the tunnel side and suddenly everything went dark. When he opened his eyes, his head was spinning and he was shaken but managed to get out of the car. The Ferrari was severely damaged, but Ronaldo barely had a scratch on his body. In fact, he still trained that same day, knowing that he had just cheated death. Fabrice Muamba. While some people like Ronaldo are lucky to walk away unhurt from Ferrari crashes without needing a trip to the hospital, for some other players, cheating death is a lot more complicated. Take Fabrice Muamba, for instance. His heart literally stopped for 78 minutes. Fabrice Muamba moved to England from Zaire at the age of 11. He worked his way through the ranks from youth football at Arsenal to Birmingham in the Championship and then to Bolton Wanderers in the Premier League. At Bolton, he quickly established himself as an intense integral squad member, living the dream of several African football enthusiasts. On March 17, 2012, Bolton had an FA Cup quarter-final match against Tottenham Hotspur at White Hart Lane, and Muamba was part of the lineup as expected. The match began, and it was fierce. Muamba was a force in the middle of the pitch for Bolton. He looked at the giant scoreboard in the stadium and saw it was almost halftime. As he anticipated the referee's whistle for the halftime break, disaster struck. 43 minutes into the match, with 2 minutes left to play before halftime, Fabrice Muamba suddenly went down. He was nowhere near the ball and had no one by his side. Fortunately, Rafael van der Vaart, a Spurs player, noticed immediately and began to signal wildly for help as he screamed at the top of his lungs. At almost the speed of light, medics raced onto the pitch toward Muamba while the entire stadium was chanting his name, trying to wake him up. It was a difficult moment, as footballers from both teams could barely stand it. Some were already crying when the medics figured out that the 23-year-old football player had just suffered a cardiac arrest. As fate would have it, a Spurs fan who was also a consultant cardiologist at the London Chest Hospital was in the stands that day, and his name is Dr. Andrew Diener. Dr. Diener tried to make his way down to the pitch, but two young stewards would have none of it. Fortunately, he found an older steward who listened to him and led him onto the pitch. The medical team was already giving the player CPR when he joined in. Together with the medical team, they administered 2 defibrillator shocks right there on the pitch, and the crowd was still chanting Muamba's name. And when they got no response, he was placed on the stretcher and taken into the tunnel. At that point, the crowd fell eerily silent, and the match became abandoned. While in the tunnel, Muamba received another defibrillator shock before being carried to the ambulance. He got 12 more shocks in the ambulance as they raced towards the London Chest Hospital, which was 8 miles away. Despite the shocks, Muamba's heart remained unresponsive for 78 minutes. The medical team at London Chest Hospital went to work as soon as he was wheeled in that Saturday, and they kept administering shocks and drugs. The doctors were simply hanging onto a thread of hope as there was still no response from Muamba. Suddenly, they saw his body temperature rising, and shortly, the football star slowly moved his head to the side before waking up. It was a miracle. Muamba is still regarded as one of the footballing world's most remarkable survival stories and was the most harrowing of such incidents until a similar event happened in 2018. Christian Eriksen was the star of the 2018 World Cup for his country. After a successful qualifying campaign with Denmark, many were eager to see what he could do at the next tournament, the Euro 2020. He was in peak physical condition and ready to make an impact in the competition for his country. In Denmark's opening match against Peru, Eriksen was simply sensational. He was a constant threat and had a hand in both of Denmark's goals in the match. However, midway through the second half, he also suddenly collapsed to the ground. The stadium fell silent as medics rushed onto the pitch once again to attend to Eriksen. He was visibly in pain and was eventually taken off on a stretcher. After the match, it was revealed that he had suffered from a heart arrhythmia and was taken to the hospital for further examination. After a meeting with the doctors, it was decided that he would not be able to play for the rest of the tournament. The news was a shock to the Danish team and fans around the world, as it was a heartbreaking moment for everyone involved, and that diminished the team's hopes of success. Regardless, they kept pushing and went on to reach the round of 16 before they were eventually eliminated. Christian Eriksen has since recovered and is back playing at the top of his game for Manchester United, but his collapse during the World Cup still stands as a scary reminder of how unpredictable life really is. Zlatan Ibrahimovic. It is one thing to collapse on the pitch all by yourself, but to be wanted dead by a cold criminal? That's another thing entirely. And for what? Media attention? Zlatan Ibrahimovic nearly escaped death, as he could have been killed by Swedish gunman Peter Mangs. Peter Mangs had been arrested and convicted for being the mastermind behind a series of shootings. The shootings occurred between 2003 and 2010 in Malmö, Sweden's third biggest city. But one terrible characteristic about Peter Mangs was that he hated immigrants, and about 40% of Malmö's population at the time were first or second generation immigrants. He claimed in his book that he saw Zlatan's Ferrari parked illegally on the pavement. He was so angry at what he saw that he called the footballer's mistake Balkan behavior. Apparently, he was referring to Ibrahimovic's Bosnian heritage. According to Mangs, he returned home to pick up his gun and returned to the scene. Luckily for Ibrahimovic, he had moved his car from that location when Mangs returned. Mangs wrote in his book that he felt there would have been an outrage that could have led to Zlatan getting shot. Looking at a list of Peter Mangs' victims, it's easy to see that he was not bluffing. Some of his victims were shot through windows of apartments, businesses, and even parked cars. Zlatan could have easily been one of them, but thankfully, he left early. These footballers are just like the rest of us, facing potential threats and dangers as they go about their daily activities. We're thankful for their survival regardless, as these players are wonderful to watch on the pitch, and we are not ready to lose them just yet. So which of these near-death encounters intrigued you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section down below, and thanks for watching.